In 25 BCE, the Roman Empire, at the height of its power, invaded a kingdom in Africa. They expected a quick victory. What they got was a war they couldn't win. The Kingdom of Kush had already existed for over 2,000 years before Rome was founded. They had conquered Egypt. They had built more pyramids than the Egyptians themselves. And when Rome came knocking, a one-eyed queen named Amanirenas didn't just defend her borders, she went on the offensive. She attacked Roman-occupied Egypt, captured several towns, and took the bronze head of Emperor Augustus as a trophy. Then she buried it under the steps of a temple, so her people could walk over his face for eternity. That bronze head was discovered in 1912. It's now in the British Museum. This is the Kingdom of Kush, one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. And the evidence tells a remarkable story. Let's start at the beginning. Around 2500 BCE, while the Great Pyramid of Giza was still under construction, a sophisticated urban civilization was emerging along the Nile in what is now Sudan. Archaeologists call it the Kerma culture, named after its capital city. The Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet spent decades excavating Kerma, and what he found challenged everything scholars thought they knew about early African civilization. Kerma wasn't a village, it was a city. The main religious structure, called the Western Defufa, still stands today. A massive mud brick temple that dominated the landscape. The city had specialized craftsmen, organized agriculture, and a ruling class buried in tombs filled with gold, ivory, and bronze. Here's what makes this significant. Kerma was not a colony of Egypt. It was not built by Egyptians. The archaeological evidence, the pottery styles, burial practices, and architectural traditions shows a distinct indigenous African civilization that developed independently. For nearly 1,000 years, Kerma grew in power. By 1700 BCE, it controlled territory stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile. The Egyptians called this land Kush, and they feared it. Egyptian texts from this period describe military campaigns against Kush, trade expeditions to acquire gold and ivory, and diplomatic marriages to secure peace. Kerma wasn't just surviving alongside Egypt, it was competing with it. Then, around 1500 BCE, Egypt conquered Kush. For 5 centuries, the region was ruled as an Egyptian province. But cultures don't simply disappear under occupation. The Kushites absorbed Egyptian religion, writing, and royal ideology, then made it their own. When Egypt collapsed into civil war around 1070 BCE, Kush re-emerged. A new dynasty arose at Napata, near the sacred mountain of Gebel Barkal. They built pyramids, smaller but steeper than the Egyptian originals, and worshipped Amun, the supreme god, with a fervor that would eventually surpass Egypt itself. By 747 BCE, the Kushite king Paye looked north and saw chaos. Egypt had fractured into competing kingdoms, ruled by Libyan warlords fighting among themselves. Paye decided to restore order by conquering the entire Nile Valley. The victory stele of Paye, discovered in 1862 and now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, describes what happened next. Paye marched his armies north, defeating every opponent. City after city surrendered. When he reached Memphis, the ancient Egyptian capital, he personally climbed the great temple of Ptah to perform the sacred rituals. Paye didn't see himself as a foreign conqueror. He saw himself as the legitimate pharaoh, the true heir to Egyptian tradition. And remarkably, many Egyptians agreed. For the next century, Kushite pharaohs ruled Egypt. Historians call this the 25th dynasty. Paye's successors, Shabaka, Shabitku, and Tahaka, didn't just occupy Egypt, they revitalized it. They restored temples, revived ancient religious texts, and launched ambitious building projects. Tahaka, in particular, left his mark everywhere. His constructions at Karnak, his monuments at Gebel Barkal, his campaigns to defend Egypt from Assyrian invasion, all documented in contemporary inscriptions. But the 25th dynasty faced an enemy even they couldn't defeat: Assyria. The Assyrian Empire, based in modern-day Iraq, had developed the most formidable military machine the ancient world had ever seen. Iron weapons, siege warfare, organized terror as a tool of statecraft. In 674 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt. The first attempt failed. Taharka's forces repelled them, but Esarhaddon returned in 671 BCE with a larger army. Assyrian records, preserved on clay tablets now held in the British Museum, describe the campaign in detail. They captured Memphis. They drove Taharka south, and when Taharka's successor Tantamani tried to reclaim Egypt, the Assyrians responded with overwhelming force. In 663 BCE, the Assyrians sacked Thebes, one of the most sacred cities in the ancient world. The destruction was so complete that the Hebrew prophet Nahum, writing decades later, used it as a warning. Are you better than Thebes, that sat by the Nile? The 25th dynasty was over, but the Kingdom of Kush was not. The Kushite kings retreated south to Napata, then eventually further south to Meroe, and there, far from Assyrian reach, they would build something new. Meroe represents the final and longest phase of Kushite civilization, lasting from roughly 300 BCE to 350 CE. That's over 600 years. The city of Meroe, located between the 5th and 6th cataracts of the Nile in modern Sudan, became one of the great iron-producing centers of the ancient world. Massive slag heaps, the waste product of iron smelting, still surround the site today. The Meroitic Kushites developed their own writing system. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphics, which scholars deciphered in the 1820s, Meroitic script remains only partially understood. The French linguist Claude Rilly has made significant progress, but many texts still cannot be fully translated. What we can read reveals a sophisticated state. Royal decrees, temple dedications, records of trade with Egypt, Arabia, and possibly India. Meroe was connected to the wider ancient world through commerce, exporting gold, ivory, ebony, and enslaved people in exchange for Mediterranean luxury goods. And they kept building pyramids. More than 200 pyramids cluster around the royal cemeteries at Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru. These aren't copies of Egyptian monuments. They represent a distinctly Kushite architectural tradition that continued for centuries. Which brings us back to Queen Amanirenas. In 30 BCE, Rome conquered Egypt. Cleopatra was dead. The Ptolemaic dynasty was finished. And suddenly, the Roman Empire shared a border with Kush. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing in his geography around 20 CE, provides our most detailed account of what happened next. In 25 BCE, the Roman prefect of Egypt, Aelius Gallus, led most of his forces on an ill-fated expedition to Arabia. Seeing the opportunity, the Kushites struck. Amanirenas, along with her son, Prince Akinidad, led an army north into Roman Egypt. They captured Syene, modern-day Aswan. They captured Philae. They seized Roman prisoners and, according to Strabo, the bronze head and statues of Emperor Augustus. Rome's response was swift. The general Gaius Petronius marched south with a punitive expedition. He recaptured the lost territories and pushed deep into Kush, reaching the city of Napata and razing it. But Kush didn't surrender. The war dragged on. Petronius couldn't hold territory that far from his supply lines, and Amanirenas kept fighting. Finally, around 21 or 20 BCE, both sides agreed to negotiate. Kushite ambassadors traveled to the Greek island of Samos, where Augustus was staying. The resulting treaty was remarkably favorable to Kush. Rome returned captured territory. Rome agreed not to collect tribute. The border was fixed at Maharaka, with a demilitarized buffer zone. For a small African kingdom facing the greatest military power on earth, this was an extraordinary outcome. The Kingdom of Kush had survived and would continue for another 3.5 centuries. So why isn't this story more widely known? The early archaeology of Kush was shaped by colonial assumptions. When George Reisner, a pioneering but deeply prejudiced American archaeologist, excavated the Kushite royal cemeteries in the early 20th century, he struggled to accept what he found. Reisner's field notes, now held at Harvard, reveal his thinking. He proposed that the Kushite ruling class must have been lighter-skinned immigrants from Egypt or Libya, despite skeletal evidence showing they were indigenous Africans. He couldn't reconcile black African rulers with the sophisticated civilization he was uncovering. Modern scholarship has moved beyond these biases. The work of researchers like Laszlo Turok, Derek Welsby, and Claude Rilly has established Kush as a major civilization in its own right. one that shaped and was shaped by Egypt, but remained culturally distinct. The Kingdom of Kush existed for over 3,000 years. It produced pharaohs who ruled Egypt. It built more pyramids than Egypt. It developed its own writing system. It fought Rome to a standstill. The evidence is there, in the monuments, in the inscriptions, in the artifacts held in museums from Khartoum to London to Boston. This isn't revisionist history, it's documented history, waiting to be told. The Kingdom of Kush, the African empire that outlasted Rome. If you want to go deeper, the full research, the primary sources, the complete story of Queen Amanirenas, you can find it at OrigineX.org. Evidence-led scholarship on civilizations the textbooks left behind. I'm the OrigineX Research Desk. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.